In a quiet town nestled between rolling hills and dusty roads, there lived a young woman named Elena Morales, a name that most people in town knew, not because of fame or fortune, but because of her spirit. Elena was the kind of person who carried light wherever she went. Even when her shoes were torn and her notebooks filled with worn-out pages, her eyes still shimmered with an untamed fire, the kind that only those who still believe in dreams can have. Her home was small, made of bricks that had weathered too many storms, and yet it felt warm because of one man, her father, Miguel. He was a mechanic, the best in town, though most days he barely earned enough to fix their own leaking roof. His hands were calloused, his back bent from years of hard labor, but his heart was unshaken. Every night, as the sun disappeared beyond the hills, he would tell Elena the same words. Hope is the only thing we can afford to keep. For Elena, those words were not just advice, they were a promise. From the moment she could read, she dreamed of becoming a doctor. She wanted to help people like her father, people who had worked their whole lives only to find themselves broken by life's unfairness. Every morning before sunrise, she'd sit by the window, books open, lips moving in silence as she memorized medical terms by the faint glow of a candle. Her father would watch her with quiet pride, his tired eyes softening. He used to joke, "One day, the people of this town will call you Dr. Morales, and I'll tell them I was your first patient, the one who believed in you before the world did." Life was never easy, but Elena found joy in the little things. The smell of rain on dusty streets. The laughter of children playing near the repair shop. The sound of her father humming old songs while tightening bolts. She worked part-time at a local grocery store after school, saving every penny for her dream, a university in the city that promised a better future. She believed in that dream more than anything else. Her friends used to tease her. "You really think people like us can make it out?" they'd say. And she'd always answer with a smile, "Someone has to try. Why not me?" But dreams, no matter how pure, are fragile things. They require faith, and faith is hard to hold when the world begins to crumble around you. The first crack appeared one humid summer evening. Her father had been working late, fixing an old truck for a local farmer. When he didn't come home by midnight, Elena went to the shop to check on him. She found him on the floor, clutching his chest, his wrench still in hand. Panic surged through her body as she screamed for help. The hospital was far, the ambulance took too long, and the night air seemed to swallow her voice. Her father survived that night, but barely. The doctors said it was a heart attack, caused by years of stress and exhaustion. They also said he needed long-term treatment, medication, rest, and regular checkups. But treatment costs money, and money was the one thing Elena didn't have. From that moment, her life changed. The girl who once studied with stars in her eyes now faced bills she couldn't pay and decisions no one her age should ever have to make. Her scholarship dreams were pushed aside as reality demanded its price. She dropped out of her final year of school to work full-time at a local cafe, often taking double shifts. She promised herself it would only be for a while, just until her father got better. Every paycheck went straight to hospital bills and medicine. She lived on instant noodles, skipped meals, and walked to work because she couldn't afford the bus fare. Yet, whenever her father asked how things were, she smiled and said, "Everything's fine, Papa. Just focus on getting better." Deep down, she still believed that hope could carry them through. She had seen her father fight his whole life with nothing but hope in his pocket. Surely it had to count for something. Surely it couldn't fail them now. But as she stood by his bedside one night, watching the heart monitor beep softly, a small part of her began to wonder, what if hope wasn't enough? The stars outside still glowed faintly over their little town, and for the first time, Elena couldn't bring herself to look up at them. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The scent of machine oil no longer filled their small house. Instead, the air smelled faintly of medicine, the bitter reminder of how fragile life had become. Elena woke up before dawn each day, made her father's tea, checked his blood pressure, and then left for work. She worked until the streets were empty, until her feet bled and her eyes burned, just to keep the lights on and the medicine bottles full. The old laughter between her and her father had grown quiet. He tried to smile for her, but guilt lived in his eyes. One night, as she helped him into bed, he said softly, "Mihija, you shouldn't have to live like this because of me." Elena shook her head and forced a smile. "Don't say that, Papa. You're the reason I'm still trying. You're all I've got." But as she turned away, her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Life began to blur into a routine of exhaustion. The world outside her window moved forward. Her friends graduated, left town, started new lives. Elena stayed behind, watching their pictures appear on social media like postcards from a life she would never have. The university acceptance letter she had once pinned on her wall now lay folded in a drawer, forgotten and creased, like a dream too heavy to carry. Then, one morning, the cafe she worked for shut down without warning. The owner couldn't afford to keep it open, and suddenly, the little security she had vanished overnight. She searched for another job cleaning houses, washing dishes, anything. Every interview ended with the same empty words, "We'll call you." No one ever did. Bills began to pile up. The hospital called, asking for payments she couldn't make. The pharmacy stopped giving her father's medicine on credit. She tried to stay strong, she really did, but her strength was running out faster than her hope. Some nights, she would sit on the kitchen floor surrounded by unpaid bills, whispering prayers to a God she wasn't sure was listening anymore. Then came the day that would change everything. Her father's condition worsened. His breathing grew shallow, his voice weak. She rushed him to the hospital, clutching his hand in the back of a borrowed car. The doctors did everything they could, or at least, everything she could afford. When they told her they needed to move him to intensive care, she hesitated. The cost was more than she earned in a year. "I'll find the money," she said, her voice trembling. "Just, don't let him die." She ran from door to door that night, begging for help, friends, neighbors, even strangers. Some offered small amounts, others closed their doors with pity in their eyes. By the time she returned to the hospital, the hallway outside her father's room was silent. A nurse met her eyes and didn't have to say a word. He was gone. Elena fell to her knees beside the bed. The man who had taught her to never give up, who had told her that hope was the one thing that could never be taken, was now gone, leaving her with nothing but silence. She held his hand, still warm, and whispered through her sobs, "I tried, Papa. I really tried." The funeral was small. A few neighbors came, offering condolences that sounded like echoes. After everyone left, she stood by the grave long after sunset. The sky above was streaked with orange and purple, and she thought about how her father used to say the sunset was proof that endings could still be beautiful. But that night, it didn't feel beautiful. It felt cruel. When she returned home, the house was unbearably quiet. His tools still sat on the table, his jacket still hung by the door. Every corner of the house reminded her of him and of everything she'd lost. She looked at the stack of medical bills, the empty medicine bottles, and the unpaid rent notice on the door. Her world had collapsed completely, and for the first time in her life, she didn't see a way out. She sat in her father's chair and whispered into the empty room, "You said hope is the only thing we can afford to keep. But what if it's too expensive now?" Her voice cracked, the tears finally spilling as she buried her face in her hands. The night stretched endlessly, wrapping her in a silence so heavy it felt like it was pressing against her chest. And as the clock ticked into the early hours of the morning, Elena realized something terrifying. She wasn't just mourning her father. She was mourning the person she used to be, the girl who believed that hope could save anyone. The weeks after her father's death felt like walking through a dream, not the kind filled with wonder, but the kind where everything is heavy, slow, and suffocating. Elena moved through her days like a ghost, her body present but her spirit elsewhere. She no longer spoke to neighbors or answered calls from friends. The world that once seemed wide and full of possibility had become unbearably small, a single room filled with echoes of a life that no longer existed. The town went on without her. The same people who once praised her determination now crossed the street when they saw her. Not out of cruelty, but out of discomfort. People never know what to say to someone who's lost everything. Every morning, she woke up to silence. No more laughter from the kitchen, no more clinking of tools, no more humming of old Spanish songs. Just the faint creak of floorboards and the ticking of the old wall clock her father had repaired 100 times. Each tick reminded her that time was moving forward, even though she wasn't. Her savings were gone within weeks. The bills didn't stop: rent, electricity, debts. She sold her father's old tools first, then her own books, then the furniture. Eventually, all that was left were the clothes she wore and the photographs she couldn't bear to throw away. At night, she sat by the window, staring at the empty streets below. Sometimes she would whisper, "Papa, I'm still here, but I don't know why." The words hung in the air, unanswered, fading into the darkness. As the days grew colder, so did she. Hope, that once bright flame her father had planted in her, now flickered weakly, barely alive. She stopped eating regularly, stopped looking for work. Her face became pale, her eyes hollow. The girl who used to dream of saving lives now struggled to find a reason to save her own. One evening, after receiving a final eviction notice, she packed her few remaining belongings into a small bag. The landlord's pitying eyes followed her as she walked down the hallway for the last time. She didn't know where to go. She wandered through the streets until night fell, her footsteps echoing off empty walls. The rain began suddenly, cold, relentless. She found herself on the old bridge at the edge of town, the same bridge her father used to drive across when he'd take her to school. She stood there, soaked to the bone, her breath visible in the cold air. The water below roared with the force of the storm, dark and endless. For a long time, she just stood there, gripping the railing, staring at the water. Memories flooded her mind: her father's laughter, his promise that things would get better, his final words, "Don't lose your light." But what light? She had nothing left. No family, no future, no hope. Her thoughts became quiet, heavy. The storm around her faded into the background as a strange calm washed over her. She closed her eyes, whispered one last time, "I'm sorry, Papa," and took a step closer to the edge. Just then, a voice cut through the rain, soft but firm. "Don't," it said. Elena turned, startled. An elderly woman stood a few feet away, holding a small umbrella. Her clothes were soaked, her hands trembling slightly from the cold, but her eyes were full of warmth. The woman stepped closer, speaking gently, as if afraid a loud word would shatter something fragile. "I don't know what you're going through," she said, "but I know what it feels like to want the pain to stop." Elena couldn't respond. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the rain. The woman extended her hand, her voice steady despite the storm. "If you're hurting," she said softly, "it means your heart still believes there's something worth living for. Don't silence it." For a moment, Elena hesitated. The world felt frozen: the rain, the wind, the sound of rushing water. Then, slowly, she reached out and took the woman's hand. The old woman smiled, not a grand, dramatic smile, but the kind that feels like sunrise after a long night. She led Elena away from the edge, guiding her under the shelter of a nearby tree. They stood there for a long while, saying nothing. Just breathing. Just existing. When the rain finally stopped, Elena looked up at the sky. It was still dark, but somewhere behind the clouds, a faint light began to break through. For the first time in a long time, she felt something stir inside her, something small, fragile, but real. It wasn't joy. It wasn't peace. It was hope. The next morning, Elena woke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the thin curtains of a small guest room. She didn't remember falling asleep. The elderly woman whose name she later learned was Rosa Alvarez had taken her home after that night on the bridge. Rosa lived alone in a modest house filled with the smell of herbs, old photographs, and the kind of quiet peace that only people who've lived through storms carry. Rosa didn't ask many questions. She simply handed Elena a warm blanket, a bowl of soup, and said, "Rest first. The world can wait until morning." For the first time in months, Elena slept without nightmares. When she woke, she found Rosa sitting by the window, tending to a row of potted plants. Her hands were wrinkled, her movements slow, but her presence radiated warmth. "You've got kind eyes," Rosa said with a gentle smile, "but they've forgotten how to look at life. Maybe it's time to remind them." Elena didn't know how to respond. The kindness in the stranger's voice broke something inside her, not in a painful way, but like sunlight breaking through clouds after too long in the dark. She wanted to cry, but for once, not out of despair. Over the next few days, Rosa let her stay. They cooked together, cleaned, and shared stories, quiet moments that stitched small pieces of healing into Elena's heart. Rosa told her about losing her own husband decades ago, how grief had nearly consumed her, and how helping others had saved her from drowning in it. "You don't heal by forgetting," she said one evening, "you heal by helping someone else remember they're not alone." Those words echoed in Elena's mind long after Rosa went to sleep. Weeks passed, and little by little, Elena began to rediscover herself. She found work at a local community center, cleaning at first, then helping with the children who came for after-school programs. The laughter of those kids, their unfiltered joy, reminded her of a time before pain had hardened her heart. She started smiling again, not the forced, polite kind, but real smiles that reached her eyes. She would walk home in the evenings and find Rosa waiting with tea. They talked about life, loss, and the strange way time can both wound and heal. Rosa once said, "Some of us are meant to carry light through the darkness. Even if it flickers, even if it hurts, it's still light." One afternoon, while cleaning out the storage room at the center, Elena found a stack of notebooks and a dusty camera. The director told her they were left behind from an old storytelling project, a program meant to document people's real-life struggles and recoveries. Elena felt something awaken inside her. That night, she told Rosa, maybe I can use my story. Maybe it could help someone else who's where I was." Rosa smiled softly. "That's how hope grows, child. You share it." And so she did. Elena began to write, not to relieve the pain, but to understand it. She wrote about her father's laughter, his lessons, his final words. She wrote about the nights she thought she wouldn't survive, and the stranger who reached out her hand when the world went silent. With Rosa's help, she started filming short videos, telling her story in raw, honest words. No fancy editing. No filters. Just truth. At first, only a few people watched. But slowly, her words began to spread. People from across the country, even across the world, commented, sharing their own stories of loss, heartbreak, and recovery. Many said her voice gave them strength. Others said it saved their life. Within months, her videos reached millions. Elena never sought fame, she sought connection. Her story became a mirror for thousands who had lost their way. She created a small foundation in her father's name, The Light We Keep, dedicated to helping people struggling with grief, depression, and hopelessness. On the first anniversary of her father's passing, Elena returned to the bridge where it all nearly ended. The river below flowed quietly, the air warm and still. She stood there for a long time, watching the sunlight ripple across the water. She whispered, "You were right, Papa. Hope isn't something we find. It's something we keep even when it hurts." As she turned to leave, she caught her reflection in the water. The woman staring back was no longer the girl who had lost everything. She was someone reborn, a living testament that even in the darkest nights, one small act of kindness can bring back the dawn. Somewhere in the distance, a child's laughter echoed, carried by the wind. Elena smiled, her eyes glistening not with tears of sorrow, but with the quiet strength of someone who finally understood what her father had meant all along. Hope doesn't fade. It waits for us to return.